Levi Bellfield was born into a Romany gypsy family in Isleworth, West London on the 17th of May 1968. He was one of 5 children. Aged 10, Bellfield lost his father to leukemia, and as a result, he formed a very close bond with his mother.
Bellfield was very much a mother's boy, much beloved of his mother. It was a close-knit family, brought up in West London, in what was effectively once a huge community of travellers, and was groomed to thinking from the very early days that he was very special, that there was something particular about him. His mother encouraged him in that view.
I think during his childhood he was a bit of a tearaway. He was a young lad who wanted to do what he wanted to do and not much stood in his way. So he was often kind of larking around and getting into a bit of trouble at school, but nothing completely out of the ordinary.
By the time Bellfield was 13, he'd had his first brush with the law and was arrested for burglary in 1981. It would not be the last time he was in trouble with the police.
I believe Bellfield occupied what you might describe as the halo of Levi Bellfield. I am greater than anything. He was above the law, above suspicion, operated entirely under his own steam, in his own way, at his own time.
In 1989, 21-year-old Bellfield set up home with a girlfriend. They went on to have 4 children together.
He could literally charm the birds off the trees. This is a 19.5, 20-stone man with a huge neck, almost occupying his entire shoulders. He wasn't an attractive man, but my goodness me, he had the gift of the gab, and he didn't half use it to his advantage, particularly when it came to girls.
On March the 21st, 2002, 13-year-old schoolgirl Amanda Dowler, known affectionately as Millie, went missing from her home. Journalist Martin Brunt remembers that day very well.
She was on her way home. She got off the train, was going to walk the half-mile or so back to her home. She was in her school uniform, very identifiable. This was daylight, busy time of the afternoon, lots of people around, but nobody saw anything.
Millie had phoned her father to say she was heading home, but never arrived.
She seemed to have disappeared into thin air. There was CCTV footage of her getting off the train at Walton Station. Some very blurred images of cars and the odd person in the street where she was headed home, but nothing more than that. And it became clear very early on that police were really struggling to find what had happened to her.
The last sighting of Millie Dowler was on Station Avenue in Walton, just 50 yards from the home of Levi Bellfield.
The search has taken in stretches of water, including the River Mole, but police have been concentrating on ground near the busy station and interviewing commuters.
We have nothing that gives us any positive indication that she's gone off of her own volition. Equally, we have no positive information that she has been taken off the street and abducted. At this time, all of our lines of inquiry are open.
On September the 18th, 2002, 6 months after her disappearance, the body of Millie Dowler was found by a group of foragers amongst the trees of Yateley Heath Wood in Hampshire.
So Millie was identified through dental records. She was known to be missing. Dental records were obtained, and then they were compared to the remains that were present, and sadly for her family, it confirmed that that's who it was.
It was clear to forensic ecologist Professor Patricia Wiltshire that Millie's body had been in the woods ever since she disappeared.
I was able to tell the police how long each bone had been there and how long ago it had been moved, because the bones were moved around by animals, you see. There was no doubt in my mind, really, that she had been there since the early spring.
How Millie was killed remained a mystery.
The degree of change that the body goes through after death, particularly in the sort of timescales we're talking about with Millie Dowler, really hinders what the pathologist can see, what the pathologist can say. It doesn't mean that there's nothing we can see or say, but clearly the less we have to work with, the more difficult it is.
One likes to be objective, one likes not to think of the remains as a person, one likes to just look for the evidence and you try to be objective. And then, of course, they take you into a scenario where you become fairly emotional. Well, you can't help it. It's an emotional sort of scenario. And then it comes a bit of a shock, really.
The police had no suspects and no forensic evidence. And just 5 months after the discovery of Millie Dowler's body, only a few miles from Walton-on-Thames, another young woman was murdered. At around midnight on the 3rd of February 2003 in Kingston, London, 19-year-old Marsha McDonnell caught the bus home after a night out at the cinema with friends. It was the last time they would ever see her. Walking home, Marsha was attacked from behind less than 100 yards from her parents' front door. Colin Sutton was one of the lead detectives with the Metropolitan Police at the time.
Well, Marsha was found on the street where she lived, 10 or 15 doors down from her parents' house. Local resident heard a noise, heard a whimpering, if you like, and called police, and she was found there with this terrible head wound, and she was taken to hospital and died 2 or 3 days afterwards. Marsha was killed with a single blow to the back of the head with a heavy implement.
Forensic evidence suggested the weapon used was most likely a hammer.
Hammers are effective striking tools, so it's no great surprise that you can cause very severe damage to a human skull with relatively little effort with an effective hammer. You'll often see lacerations, they're often curved to match the profile of the hammer, and you'll often see skull fractures. They're quite often depressed, so pushed inwards towards the brain, because the hammer is exerting its force so focally.
Nightfall and detectives in Hampton still work on, but though they've searched tirelessly all day, they remain baffled as to who carried out this apparently random attack.
Often these things happen and are carried out by somebody the victim knows. In this case, I'm sure police looked at boyfriends, family members, but very quickly ruled out any kind of suspect like that. So it soon became obvious that this was a stranger murder, and those are very rare. So very soon, very quickly after Marsha's murder, people in the area became very concerned that there was a killer on the loose.
Subsequent investigations led police to a mentally unstable 16-year-old who wasn't competent enough to be charged or even interrogated about the incident.
And as a result, he was sectioned and was put into to some sort of institution compulsorily. And although he hadn't been charged with the offence, everybody kind of thought, well, it was him, and so we can put that offence to bed, and you know, we've solved that, if you like.
But then investigators noticed a possible link to similar attacks that had happened in the area in the months before.
There was another 16-year-old schoolgirl that she was thought at first to have slipped over in the snow and banged her head, and it was only then when Marsha was murdered that police looked at this occurrence some 2 months previously and realised that that could have been an assault as well. And they went back to this girl who'd been treated in hospital and were able to talk to hospital staff and look at the description of her wounds and some photographs and conclude that the likelihood was that she too had been attacked but had survived. We found a couple of other offences as well. Again, young ladies had been attacked in the street and hit over the back of the head, and in both these cases they'd survived.
However, none of these other victims were able to identify the attacker.
They just, said I was walking along, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in hospital some hours or some days later. So we didn't have any kind of clue or sighting that led us towards the suspect for it, because they just simply couldn't remember it.
All of the attacks seemed to be totally unprovoked. Could they all have been committed by the same perpetrator, the man who murdered Marsha McDonnell? By joining the dots, Colin and his team could link Bellfield to another vehicle, the car that ran Kate Sheedy down.
And one of the times that he was arrested was in May 2004, when he was arrested for kidnap, which was kidnapping the landlord of a pub near where he lived in West Drayton. And nothing happened about it, and the landlord in the end said, oh no, it was just a prank that went wrong, don't worry about it. Didn't want to press charges, no charges were brought. But the crucial thing was that that arrest took place, and that abduction took place indeed, in a vehicle, and that vehicle was a white Toyota Previa. Kate Sheedy had been attacked in Isleworth, not by being hit across the head, but by being run over by a large vehicle. And she said that this vehicle was something like a Ford Galaxy. Of course, that's exactly what a Toyota Previa is.
The white people carrier, that was actually on my drive about 2 weeks before he ran Kate Sheedy over with it, only because he asked me if he could leave it there for a couple of nights, and I begrudgingly said yes.
And he got somebody to go and do a check on the number plate of the Previa that Levi had been arrested in, and I remember her saying to me, Governor, I think we might have hit the jackpot, and said it was white. We now had somebody, Levi Bellfield, who had the right kind of white van that was used at the time Amélie Delagrange was murdered, and the right type of vehicle at the time that Kate Sheedy was run over.
Bellfield was now the prime suspect. At dawn on the 22nd of November 2004, police raided his West Drayton home.
In the attic is a naked Levi Bellfield. He'd covered himself up in the hope that no one would find him. Well, they did.